Okay, hello, welcome. This is the fourth year. I am making a video about the books I read in the past year. These are the books I read in 2025. I didn't know if I was going to do this because I didn't want to make the PowerPoint and re-download all the software and stuff, but I have to thank my friend Harry for helping me with the PowerPoint. More on that later. So I read 70 books this year, about a little less than I normally read, but it was a busy year. I didn't finish some, though I finished most of them. I usually come up with a bespoke rating system each year. So like the first time I said a book was either good or just okay, stuff like that. But I'm currently recovering from food poisoning and don't have the time or patience. Really, I have the time, I just don't want to do it. I'm just going to say, yeah, it was good. I've only eaten a banana and some oyster crackers in the last 2 days. Poor me. Who knows if I'm going to make it through this recording? Who knows? Let's not waste any more time and begin. So the first book I read this year was The Code of the Woosters by P.G. Wodehouse. I have wanted to read P.G. Wodehouse for a while, and the reason I chose this book is because I saw an excerpt online, and it was from the very first page, in fact. I'm going to read it out loud to you. I reached out a hand from under the blankets and rang the bell for Jeeves. Good evening, Jeeves. Good morning, sir. This surprised me. Is it morning? Yes, sir. Are you sure? It seems very dark outside. There is a fog, sir. If you will recollect, we are now in autumn, seasons of mist and mellow fruitfulness. Season of what? Mist, sir, and mellow fruitfulness. So when I read that, I said, I gotta read this book immediately. And I got about 50 pages in, and it was just a little too silly for me. I just wasn't in the mood, and I'm one to talk with respect to silliness. I'm often guilty of silliness. But, I just didn't want to. I just wasn't the right time. All right. Next one is In Youth is Pleasure by Denton Welch. This is one of my favorite books I read this whole year, in fact. I've also long wanted to read this one. I've always been enchanted by its title. In Youth is Pleasure. It's very stuffy in a way that I like. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's a reference to like a 17th century English poem or something. But this book is just astonishing. So good. It's sort of like a 150-page Proust-like thing, but in England. Yeah. Read it. Give My Regards to 8th Street by Morton Feldman. This is a collection of essays by the contemporary 20th century composer Morton Feldman. Yeah, it was fine. Some essays were good. Some were just okay. Okay, Little Neck by Darcy Denigan. Sorry, I feel like I'm being real low energy right now. I gotta spruce myself. I was, in fact, asked to blurb this book, so I thought I would just read what I wrote in the blurb. In the tradition of Marie Redonnet and Agatha Christophe, Darcy Denigan offers a vertiginous novel buttressed by a discomfiting, paratactic voice. Little Neck is earthy, creepy, and sodden with a fragmentary consciousness. The narrator advertises it convincingly. My blood does not want to be cooled. If you had lent this book to Clarice Lispector, she would have read it and not returned it to you. Well, that says it all, doesn't it? Great. I loved it. Novel 11, Book 18 by Dag Solstad. Dag Solstad is a favorite writer. Rest in peace. He just passed away this year. And I think this is my favorite book of his that I've read. I believe it's the fourth one now that I've read. His sense for plot is just really unique and bizarre. The book takes a number of left turns, but in ways that seem totally, natural and genuinely surprising. I really loved it. He's a great influence of mine. A wonderful writer. I'm probably going to read the other, I think, like 2 books of his that are in English that I've not yet read very soon. Harmonium by Wallace Stevens. Sorry, my cat. Anytime I go on the computer, my cat just starts freaking out. Harmonium by Wallace Stevens. I went through like a phase this year of reading, books of English language modernist poetry. I've specifically though, like not in anthologies or collected or selected, but like standalone books. And Harmonium is if I'm not mistaken, I think it's Wallace Stevens' most famous book, and I hadn't read it, and so Wallace Stevens is a favorite poet, so I loved it. I will say, and this is a note that I think I've made in previous years, that I'm terrible with remembering poetry and being able to talk about it critically many months after I've read it. So for most of the collections of poetry that I've read this year, I'll probably just say like, yeah, I liked it. There was a great line in one of the poems. Must I uncrumple this much crumpled thing? Wow. The Plains by Gerald Murnane. Gerald Murnane is another favorite writer and a big influence of mine. I had not read this early novel of his, so I did. I'll admit that it didn't hit as much as I thought it would, but I liked it nonetheless. It's truly strange. As the quote here says, strangely original, ambitious, and absorbing novel. Certainly. I read The Vet's Daughter by Barbara Comins. I think it's Commons. Lovely. Takes an unexpected, fantastical turn toward the end, which I didn't anticipate, and I appreciate it. Another one of English language modernist poets. I've obviously read I read Prufrock, the actual poem, in high school, but I'd never read the collection itself from which it's originates. It's very short. I think it's only like 25 poems. I've never really been an Eliot guy, but I'm trying, and I'm still trying. The Aesthetics of Resistance, Volume 1. So I read all 3 volumes of The Aesthetics of Resistance this year by Peter Weiss in a reading group. One of my favorite reading experiences of the year. I guess I should just wait for the 3rd one to share my thoughts, but yeah, astonishing. You Dreamed of Empires by Alvaro Enrique. I did not finish this book. I'm a big fan of Enrique. He's a wonderful contemporary writer, but this one just didn't land with me, and I think that because it was just a much more straightforward historical fiction, which I'm not terribly interested in. His previous book in English, Sudden Death, has a lot more kind of, a much more playful component to it, where the present and the past are kind of regularly colliding in ways that I thought was interesting. And it has one of my favorite little segments from a novel that I can't remember now, so it's not even worth bringing up. I'll read another of his books. Sure. Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor. I did not finish this. I'm really not a fan of this writer. I read Paradise a few years ago, and I found it very underwhelming. And somebody said, you have to read Hurricane Season, and I thought that this was worse. Just a kind of one-note juvenile sensibility that really doesn't work for me. So sorry for her fans, but just didn't do it. Creative Evolution by Henri Bergson. I read this with my philosophy book club, and like with poetry, one of the problems I have with reading books of philosophy is that I'll read it, and then and this book is quite lucid. Bergson is a talented and kind of beautiful prose writer, but I don't remember like a single thing about this book. I don't remember what his argument is or really anything. So I don't know what to make of that. Great. Pink Dust by Ron Padgett. This is a recent collection by the New York School poet Ron Padgett. I think one of the few surviving like second generation New York School poets. A favorite of mine. This definitely felt like a late collection in that it's very loose and just kind of, once you've been writing poetry for like 60 years, you probably have a bit of license to just do whatever the hell you want, and that's certainly the effect that this book had on me. Fair Realism by Barbara Guest, another collection by a New York School poet. I had read Barbara Guest many times, typically, though, in anthology formats. And I've never actually read one of her books. And there was something about, I don't know, something about her like sense of line or something that it just felt a little stale to me. And I think it's fully like my shortcomings as a reader and not a reflection of the book, because she's obviously one of the all-time greats. Maybe it just was wrong time to read it. So, oh well. Elizabeth Costello by J.M. Coetzee. One of my favorite books that I read this year. I'm a fan, big fan. Has one of my favorite final lines in a novel, which I won't spoil in case you want to read it. Discrete Series by George Oppen and Of Being Numerous by George Oppen. These are early books of Oppen's, I believe. I hadn't read them in full. Discrete Series is really more of a chapbook in terms of its length, but Being Numerous is a longer, full-length collection. Yeah, one of the greats. Poems by W.H. Auden. Yeah, same thing. Great. Barley Patch by Gerald Murnane. I reread this book. I hadn't read it in many years, and what's funny is that the first time I read it, I think I had like 50 pages left, and I was like, I've read enough. So I technically didn't finish it the first time, but this time I did, and what a fool I was, because the final few pages of this book, the final section, is just incredible. Really moving for a writer who can be or has a reputation at least for being a little cold and distant. Maybe my favorite Murnane book. Although I think to a certain degree, I almost prefer his short stories, but I don't know. Okay, next. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I reread this book the first time I had read it, and the only time I had read it was when I was 15 years old. It was assigned to me in high school, and I saw somewhere that it was the 100-year anniversary. And I just thought, you know what? I should reread it. And there's some really elegant prose in here. A little melodramatic. There are some elements of the plot that I feel like make it seem obvious that a person in their mid-20s wrote this. But hey, what can you say? All right. God's Ear by Jenny Schwartz. This is a play that a friend recommended to me, and I don't really remember anything about it. Mr. Cogito by Zbigniew Herbert, Polish poet. I don't remember anything about it. Practical Poems by Ben Roylance. And I love these. I saw Ben read in Germantown in Philadelphia, and he had these chapbooks, and I love the title, Practical Poems. Lovely. And a great reader, too. Lord Chandos. And other writings by Hugo von Hofmannsthal, another book that I've long wanted to read. This kind of thing is really up my alley, and I was surprisingly just left a little cold by it. I don't know. It didn't. I first heard of it via Bartleby and Company by Enrique Villamatas, which is a favorite book of mine, and ever since then I've wanted to read it. But oh well. Go Figure by Ray Armantrout. This is a recent collection by famous American poet. Yeah, it was fine. Okay, Underneath the Lintel by Glenn Berger. I don't remember anything about it. The Bridge by Hart Crane, a classic. It was long. Housekeeping by Marilyn Robinson. So, another book that I've heard about for years and years and years, and wow, did I hate this book. I really hated it. Like, just unbelievably cloying, grating, sentimental, humorless. I was kind of astonished by how much I disliked it. I'm in disbelief that people love this book. Yeah. If Only in Combat I Find Love by Jack Nancy. This is a debut collection from Jack Nancy, published by La Barba Metafísica, which is a press run by my friend Kit in Mexico City, and I thought these were really lovely poems, often very funny. The Aesthetics of Resistance, Volume 2 by Peter Weiss. All I'll say for this one is that the penultimate scene with Brecht in his library is one of my favorite things. Not only I read this year, but maybe one of my favorite things I've ever read in my life. Just immensely moving. Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. So, like with The Great Gatsby, I saw that it was the 100th anniversary of Mrs. Dalloway, and I'd never read it. And so I thought, well, I mean, if I reread The Great Gatsby, I owe it to Virginia Woolf to read Mrs. Dalloway. And wow, what an incredible book! Just every bit as wonderful as I expected it to be. Joe, a memoir by Joe Brainerd by Ron Padgett. This is one of my favorite books I read this year, and as much as I love Ron Padgett's poetry, I think that I almost prefer him as a memoirist. So this is the second in his, I suppose, trilogy of books that he's written about his friends. The first one was about Ted Berrigan. Second one here is about Joe Brainerd, and the third and perhaps final one that was published just this year, which I also read, was about Dick Gallup. And I think that Joe Brainerd memoir is my favorite of the three. Just an incredibly sweet portrait. Made me cry. Joe Brainerd really did seem like a saint-like figure. What a sweet man. My Earliest Person by Jennifer Song. I love Jennifer's poetry. I got the chance to see her read earlier this year. And I think this might be my favorite book of hers that I've read. Well, I've only read two. Come Back Death, I believe, is the first one. But one of my favorite contemporary poets. Really, really wonderful. Seduction Theory by Emily Adrian. I love this novel. It was a lot of fun. It had a kind of Nabokovian metatextual thing going on with a lot of humor. And I sort of just flew through it. Full disclosure, Emily blurbed my novel that was published this year. So maybe this is a little bit of an insider baseball, but I loved it. I recommend it. Where I Hang My Hat by Dick Gallup. This is, if I'm not mistaken, sort of like the collection of poetry by Dick Gallup, or like his most famous. I've always loved the title, and I love these poems. There was one about listening to people poop and pee in the bathroom. That was my favorite. 63 Dream Palace by James Purdy. I reread this novella. I hadn't read it in maybe like 15 years. And, when I first read it, I remember it being very funny. And then I read it this time, and it is just like brutally depressing. What was I thinking? What a monster I was. But just James Purdy is a stylist like no other. He's such a unique writer. One of my favorite 20th century American writers. I highly recommend it. Innocence by Michael Joseph Walsh. This is a collection of poetry that I really loved. Michael actually has another collection coming out next year. And if you want to do karaoke and have a great time, you got to do it with Mike, because there's one time this year we did karaoke, and then he said, just give me any song and I'll do it. And I jokingly said Under the Bridge by Red Hot Chili Peppers. And he was like, all right, I'll do it. I didn't really expect him to do it, but he did it. And he killed. The whole room was on his side. It was a sight to see. Great guy. Rewriting the Soul by Ian Hacking. This is another one of my philosophy book club books. I really loved it. I think Ian Hacking is kind of a genius. His writing is just so, like propulsive and lucid. And I do remember what this book's about, unlike Bergson. Sorry, Bergson. But I'm very excited to read more Ian Hacking. One of my favorite essays of his is an essay that he wrote about the DSM-5 that was published in the LRB 10 years ago or so. Rest in peace. Monsieur Pan by Roberto Bolaño. I had not read this in many, many years. This is one of Bolaño's kind of minor novels. It is. It's fine. The Golden Age of Paraphernalia by Kevin Davies. This is probably my favorite collection of poetry I read this year. I think Kevin Davies is incredible. Just a really, really unique poet. This has maybe the worst cover of any book I've ever seen in my life. Dick, a memoir of Dick Gallup by Ron Padgett. Like with the Joe Brainerd memoir, I love this book. Maybe not quite as much. Dick Gallup seemed like a bit more of a difficult person, and maybe that colored my experience of the book, but he also had a very kind of, well, I don't want to say tragic, but yeah, difficult life. Rest in peace, Dick Gallup. Party Going by Henry Green. I did not finish this book. I've long wanted to read Henry Green, and I made it about 50 pages, and I just found this unbelievably dull, just really stiff and cold and unfunny, and I just could not drag my eyes across the page any longer. Sorry. Did not finish. Aphorisms by Cesar Vallejo. This is one of those green integer books. It was fine. Aphorisms, Who doesn't like aphorisms? I mean, it's hard to love them. It's hard to hate them. Subdivision by J. Robert Lennon. I really loved this book. I thought it was incredibly inventive and funny and very inspiring to me personally. A favorite book that I read this year. Sort of reminded me of The Castle by Kafka a little bit, which I'm coming to very soon. Follow My Voice by Matt Zarankowicz. So this is a manuscript. It's not yet published, written by my friend Matt. Here he is on his birthday. We got some Szechuan food, and we ordered so much. Well, it was a big group, but I want to read aloud our order. It was just nuts. We got chilled spicy noodles, chilled sesame noodles, dan noodles with pork, scallion pancakes, mapo tofu, one vegetarian, one with pork, eggplant with garlic sauce, stir-fried cabbage with dried chilies, dry fried string beans, General Tso's chicken, Chongqing chicken, twice cooked pork with leeks, sizzling black pepper steak, slivers of pork with long hot peppers, very spicy, which I like, salt and pepper squid, and an entire spicy peppercorn sea bass with lotus root. Just an incredible meal. I also love this novel, and I hope it gets to see the world someday, so other people can read it. Light Duress by Paul Celan, another green integer book. I bought a bunch of them. I forget if there was a sale or something, or if I just found a lot. I don't remember, but yeah, it was fine. The Aesthetics of Resistance, Volume 3 by Peter Weiss. Yeah, just a totally, transformative book for me. I wish I was more sound of mind right now. I feel like I'm... What do I have to say about it? It's great. Yeah, I don't know. Whatever. All right. Pan by Michael Clune. I think one of the only contemporary novels, other than Emily's novel, that I read this year. Yeah. Sorry, I got some coconut water here. Yeah, I liked it. I liked it a lot. It was fun. I felt like it captured the experience of having panic attacks quite well. An experience I would wish on nobody. AQ Saga by Ben Roylance, another poetry collection by Ben. This one is really batshit insane, science fiction poetry, really dense, and just a total joy. I loved it. The Mystery Guest by Gregor Boulier. So with this book, I was at a party, and my friend Harry had a hat that said Mystery Guest, which I thought was very funny, a funny hat to wear at a party. And then I said, there's no chance that this hat is a reference to that French book from like whatever. And he was like, yeah, actually it is. And I said, are you kidding me? I was kind of surprised. And I said, I read that book so long ago, like 2010, 2011, I forget. I remember liking it. And he said, I'll lend it to you. And so he lent it to me, and I enjoyed it. Very silly. And Harry, I was not going to make this video because I hate making the PowerPoint. And then Harry, he's a computer whiz kind of guy. He said, I can make it very quickly with like Linux or something. I don't remember. But thanks, Harry. I really appreciate it. Couldn't have done this without you. The Castle by Franz Kafka, which I'm still reading. Let me explain. So I started The Castle maybe 3 years ago, and I read about 100 pages, and I put a bookmark in it, and then just for whatever reason put it back on my bookshelf. And then I was walking by the said bookshelf, and I picked it out, and I thought it would be funny if I just kept reading from where I left off, a gap of 3 years. And I did. And I read another 60 or 80 pages or so, and then I put the bookmark back in, and then I will pick it up and finish it at some other point in the future. But what was funny is that I didn't really remember much of what happened in the first half of the book, so I was just kind of going in blind. But for a book like this, I don't really think it matters. So I recommend doing something like this. Berlin Childhood around 1900 by Walter Benjamin. A friend recommended this. I never had heard of it. It's autobiographical, sort of micro essays by Benjamin about, well, I guess it says it in the title, about his childhood. Really beautiful. Just he's such an amazing prose writer. I love Benjamin. Yeah, great. A favorite book. A Far Cry from Kensington by Muriel Spark. I absolutely adored this book. I love Muriel Spark. She's one of my very favorite writers. And when I read this, I said, this is my favorite book of hers. Previously, I probably would have said, probably like Jean Brody. But this book is just so funny and really unique in terms of its voice. And I just loved it, top to bottom. Couldn't recommend it enough. Excellent Women by Barbara Pym. I guess I was on a kind of mid-century English kick. I also love this book. One of my favorite books I read this year. She's a little drier than Muriel Spark, but still equally very funny. And there's just a lot of like, I don't know, there's like a subtle sensibility to her writing and her vision that I really admired. I'm definitely going to read more Barbara Pym in the future. Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov. Nabokov, I always forget which one it is. What's funny is that when I was 20, I read Lolita, and I loved it. And then right after, I read Panine, and I loved it. And then I said, well, what's the next one I got to read? I said, Pale Fire. So I bought Pale Fire. And then 17 years passed. I haven't read Nabokov since I was 20 years old. And yeah, I mean, it's as good as everybody says. It didn't hit, I don't know. Like, there was just something about it that just, I didn't love it as much as I thought I was going to. But I found it obviously really inventive and incredibly impressive and inspiring too. Something that I'm going to work on in the future has certainly been inspired by the structure of this book. So, great. That's the wrong one. What am I doing? Okay. Objectivity by Lorraine Daston and Peter Gallison. This is another philosophy book club book, and it was fine. It's like 450 pages, and it was the type of book that after 100 pages, I was just kind of like, yep, I get it. Objectivity as a scientific concept is historically determined. And then there was just like 300 pages of examples. But I already bought the argument. So I don't know. A lot of lovely little anecdotes about the history of science and specifically in the 17th and 18th century that I appreciated. I love a lot of that kind of stuff, like Humboldt, Yeah. Loitering with Intent by Muriel Spark. Well, I thought Far Cry from Kensington was my favorite novel by Muriel Spark, but then I read this one, and now this one is my favorite. Just like, so every page is just, I couldn't put it down. Again, a voice that's sui generis and buoyant and incredibly funny, and the structure of the book is, I should have done this without having had food poisoning, I think. Lucy by Jamaica Kincaid. I assigned this book to my creative writing class. I usually like to assign one short novel or a novella at the end of the semester, and I had not read this one in many years. It's a favorite book. I reread it, and it was as good as I remember it. Jamaica Kincaid, I think, is a really underrated writer. I mean, I know she's famous, but like, just in terms of, I don't know, her stature and literary discourse or whatever, I just think that she's one of the finest English prose writers living, sincerely. I read my friend Zach's manuscript, a novel. I think he's still in between titles, so I've signed an NDA on releasing. I'm just joking. I haven't signed an NDA, but I don't know. I didn't want to go with whatever title that he didn't. Maybe he doesn't like it. So this is another book I really hope sees the light of day next year, maybe, or the year after. Just an incredibly funny book, also captivating. And structurally unique. I hope you all read it. Great guy, too. Really sweet. Jack the Modernist by Robert Gluck. I reread this. I read the New York Review of Books reissue. One of my favorite ever novels, and it still is. Above the Tree Line by Dick Gallup. So I was very lucky to. I feel like I ran away from this one a little quickly. There's no book like it. There's no novel that's written like this novel. What else can you say? Okay, so how did I come to read this book? Well, so after I read the Dick Gallup book, I emailed Ron Padgett because I just thought, if you really love somebody's writing, you should just email them and send a note of admiration. Like, what's the harm? And so I did, and I said, dear Mr. Padgett, I'm a big fan of yours for many years, and I loved your recent memoir. I also love the Joe Brainerd memoir. Thank you for writing it, something like that. And he responded pretty quickly, and he said, oh, thanks so much. Let me send you a copy of one of Dick's old books, Above the Tree Line, which is out of print. So that was very sweet of him, and I loved it. I think I like this collection as much as I did Where I Hang My Hat. So thanks, Ron. The Bell by Iris Murdoch. I've always wanted to read Iris Murdoch, and I, for whatever reason, I don't know, kicked the can down the road, finally decided to read The Bell, and I was just blown away by it. Wow. I can't wait to read. Good thing she's written like 50 books because I have way more of Murdoch to read. But the way that the patience with which she kind of draws out character and how it kind of almost with like a domino effect comes to its startling conclusion is just I love this book. Great, beautiful. Oh man. The Abyss of Crew. I wanted to keep going with my Muriel Spark kind of kick, and I had this short one. I forget where I bought it. It wasn't so good. It's funny. It's sort of like if Watergate was happening in a nunnery or I guess an abbey. And it's written in the present tense, which I always have an aversion to books in the present tense. I don't know why. Not always, but a lot of the time. It was short. It's like 100 pages, so whatever. But so even your favorites can disappoint you. Lesson learned. It's The Characters by Isabel Pavan Fried. I loved this book. It's this kind of like stoner noir that's set in San Francisco. I read it in like one sitting, I think. It was just published this year. So actually I read 3 contemporary novels this year. This is one of my favorite books I read this year. I thought it was very funny, really structurally, formally unique, and really kind of kept me on my feet. I recommend it. City of Rats by Kopi. So this book won't be published until next year. I was lucky enough to get a advance galley. My friend Kit translated it, and he translated Kopi's other book that's in English, The Queen's Ball, which is one of my favorite ever novels. This book, City of Rats, is sort of like if Ratatouille for perverts. It was good, a lot of fun. I can't compare it to Queen's Ball because that's like one of my favorite books. So I didn't like it as much as Queen's Ball, but I still enjoyed it very much. I recommend checking it out when it comes out. I think in March. Okay, Consider the Oyster by M.F.K. Fisher. M.F.K. Fisher is probably my favorite food writer. She has one of my favorite essays called Notes on Cravings about her love of the potato chip. And I didn't know that David Foster Wallace got his title from her. I was at an estate sale, and I just found the copy of this book, and I got it, and I also read it, I think, in like one sitting. There's a great line in it from, I think, the title essay. Life is hard, we say. An oyster's life is worse. Wow. Okay. The Fever by Wallace Shawn. I read this like the day I was most ill with my current episode, and I thought it would be appropriate to read a book called The Fever. I didn't have a fever, actually. I'm complaining too much. I'm sorry. Yeah, it was fine. These last 2, I'm still reading Trilce by Cesar Vallejo. It's a classic, of course. I only have about 20 pages left or whatever. Great. And then last book I'm reading, I have about 100 pages left of this, but I'm counting it. Dark Back of Time by Javier Marias. One of my favorite books I've read this year. I just adore him. I think he's one of my favorite novelists. I think A Heart So White, pardon me, A Heart So White is still my favorite novel of his. Though this might, I haven't finished it yet, so this one might be my favorite. But my favorite book is still Written Lives. his collection of short biographies of famous writers, a la the John Aubrey Brief Lives. Anyway, awesome, great, wonderful. My favorite books I read this year were In Youth is Pleasure by Denton Welsh, Novel 11, Book 18 by Dag Solstad, The Aesthetics of Resistance by Peter Weiss, Elizabeth Costello by J.M. Coetzee, Barley Patch by Gerald Renane, Joe, A Memoir of Joe Brainerd by Ron Padgett, A Far Cry from Kensington by Muriel Spark, Loitering with Intent by Muriel Spark, which is my favorite book of the year. If there's one book I recommend, it's that one. Excellent Women by Barbara Pym, Lucy by Jamaica Kincaid, Jack the Modernist by Robert Gluck, The Bell by Iris Murdoch, which is probably my second favorite book I read this year. Consider the Oyster by M.F.K. Fisher, and Dark Back of Time by Javier Marias. There you have it, folks. Wow. Okay, another one of these. I'm sorry. This one wasn't very good, was it? But well, whatever. Have a good happy New Year, and 2026. We got a lot to look forward to. Okay, bye bye.